Thank you, Soumya and Ankur. Mr. Nirmal Shani, Director South Asia IHS. Sir has an experience of over 13 plus years in sales, operations, data architecture, and general management. Sir manages a business for all solution groups of IHS in the Indian subcontinent, primarily India, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh, and also in Nepal, Bhutan, and Maldives. Prior to joining IHS, Sir was the business head with Dun& Bradstreet India for 9 years. He has also worked with Bennett Coleman of Times Group. He is a mediator, actively involved with charitable organization and is passionate about scuba diving. Sir has done his MBA marketing from Wellinger Institute of Management in the year 1999 to 2001 and graduation from Narsi Munji College of Commerce and Economics, Mumbai. He has a rich corporate experience in business development, lead generation, key account management, new business development, competitive analysis, market research, leadership, B2B, and customer relationship management. So please enlighten us with your words of wisdom.
So firstly, I want to thank Sir Mr. Balaji himself for providing me this great opportunity, this fantastic platform. To me, the whole experience, right from the time I was first approached to the time I was actually welcomed on the stage by Isha, it demonstrates several different attributes that one would like to see in the future corporate citizens of India. For me, it's always been a personal dream, so I haven't shared this with you, but I was sharing with some of the other colleagues, to study in Pune. I'm born and brought up in Bombay. I did my graduation from Bombay. I had my MBA from Bombay. But I never got the chance to come into Pune to sit into a university or study about anything. So the last hope that I had was then finally let me try and do my doctorate from some institute in Pune. But today is the first opportunity I have to partially realize my dream, if I can call it that, to at least walk into a campus in Pune, thanks to the graciousness of this institute, of the directors, the various directors that I've met today. I'm actually thankful to each one of you, sirs. I'm really thankful to some of the people who have been interacting with me, Arpita, Soumya, Prashant, Rahul. They've actually worked diligently behind the scenes to be able to make it happen for me here today. So I want to start by sincere gratitude towards each one of you and the Institute to give this opportunity. Coming to what I'm going to be talking about today, I have been briefed that the expectations are that we want to get students industry ready and that you would want to get a view into the corporate world, what I call the ruthless corporate world. Every MBA institute does its best to groom its students to the maximum extent possible, because what we believe is that every brick, the longer it stays in the kiln, the stronger it will be when it goes into the wall. But no matter how much you prepare somebody in the academic institute, you always have people protecting you. You're always shielded from the outside world. Your directors, your professors, the entire support staff in the institute always shields you from the ruthless corporate world. So what I thought today was to come here and not just talk about IHS, which I will do. I will talk about IHS because while a lot of people know about the company, a lot of people don't know about the company as well. Instead of talking a lot about the company, what I thought I'll speak about for a brief while and then come into something which is very, very close to my heart and also something which IHS does for a living. I thought I'll talk about the energy economy imperative. And the reason I chose this topic, so there are 10 different business groups that I manage. But then I chose energy over automotive, which was the second that I could have probably picked up, was because automotive, you guys sitting in Pune know a lot about automotive companies. All of us have either a two-wheeler or a three-wheeler or a four-wheeler or a commercial vehicle that we've seen or that we've known of. But energy is something that fuels the economy. Energy is critical to the growth of any company, to the growth of any country, to the growth of the world, to bring harmony in the world. And which is why I thought, since IHS has strong capabilities in energy, let me talk about the energy economy today, because very few people are aware of what happens behind the scenes for maybe, say, a 50 paisa increase in the cost of diesel, or for a cap on the number of LPG cylinders that we are going to get at home. It was a very unpopular decision taken by the previous government to cap the number of subsidized LPG cylinders, and there was a huge uproar. Every newspaper talked about it. But there's a stark reality. And that stark reality, I call it a quiet energy crisis of India. We're all going through a very quiet crisis, and I call it quiet because while the scams have been exposed, but there's a lot of talk in the media about it, very few people have the technical expertise to be able to comment or analyze what will happen into the future given the crisis that is currently brewing. So having said that, what I'll do is I'll start with a video on IHS. That video should give you a quick overview on what IHS is, what IHS does. To some, it may confuse you a lot more than it may enlighten you, because that's what happened to me when I first read about IHS 3 years ago when I got the opportunity to work with them. But nevertheless, that is our corporate brand video. Can somebody help me play this? How do I play this?
Each day, people everywhere embark on projects of enormous scale. They make choices that can change the course of a pipeline or a river. They impact the world in ways that are too small to see and too big to miss. And they're all connected by a complexity that grows with each passing day. From this perspective, there's no such thing as a small decision. That's why the men and women who make those decisions rely on IHS. They depend on us because we understand the exacting rigor that goes into every business decision. And because of our proven ability to calibrate to the demands of the marketplace. Our industry specialists provide information, analysis, and expert guidance at every stage, from ground-level field experts to stateroom-level advisors. We enrich information with human perspective and machine intelligence to uncover deep insights, empowering our customers to seize the best opportunities. The depth of our offerings extend from the smallest detail to the big picture overview, from the C-suite to the shop floor, across enterprises that touch everything from microchips to cargo ships. We're with you every step of the way, through those crucial moments where everyday decisions lead to sweeping transformations. Our scale of thought is limited only by the scope of your ambition.
So I hear half the audience clapping. Is that because you all understood or didn't understand what IHS is? How many actually got an idea about what IHS is from this video? So there's only 4 people who are super intelligent in the room, right? I didn't understand anything about IHS the first time I heard about this company. So you're definitely much better than me, and you will do better than me than the guy sitting up there. So let's talk a little bit more about the company that I work for, that I represent, IHS. So IHS is one of the largest information companies in the world. We are a publicly traded company listed on the New York Stock Exchange. 10 years ago, we went public when our share price at the time of listing was about $16. This week, our share prices touched, I think, about $120, $125. So it's probably among the best performing companies the US stock markets have seen in the last decade. And that's through 2 different severe crises that hit the financial markets in the US. Every decision matters, and you will soon realize this when you step into the corporate world, and which is why leaders across the world are relying on IHS. We actually help them make choices. Companies anyways make choices. We would like to believe we help improve the choices that they make. As a premium provider for the global market industry, technical expertise, we actually understand all the considerations that are guiding decisions that companies make today. Information, analytics, expertise. This is what companies depend on for IHS to help them decide about whatever they do, from board level decisions to day-to-day operations. Over 75%, actually now the number's gone up to 80% of the Fortune 500 companies around the world are our clients across 165 countries. In India, right from the government of India, various ministries, to the armed forces, to the companies which are the public sector companies, Maharatnas in the core sectors, to financial institutions, and also some academic institutions on the engineering side use IHS information. We actually sit in core and critical systems of almost every company that is shaping the future. I've just listed about 7 different segments here. And I was just talking with your president some while ago. You know, in his years in the military, he's actually come across IHS in a different avatar, which was IHS Janes. So we, for example, in the aerospace and defense sector, work with every army, every navy, every air force in the world. When you say that the armed forces are actually protecting our borders, often it's the data that they rely on within IHS systems that they rely on. Chemicals, each of us is familiar with different products of chemicals. So the plastic PET bottles that we drink water in, the nylon clothes that we wear, the cars that we drive today, everything is dependent on chemicals. And IHS actually tracks 200 different chemicals around the world. The entire finance community, all major merchant banks, investment banks, large financial institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, etc., rely significantly on IHS information and our forecasts, our insights on what's happening in the worlds around the world. In terms of technology, we've acquired several companies that are now able to track different components, different devices, and we actually go to the last mile of tracking down a component. So I'm sure you all were probably familiar when Apple launched the new iPhone. Right? Is there anybody in the room who doesn't know that iPhone 6 was launched? Right. So what IHS does is, as soon as a new device gets launched, we break it down. It's called a tear-down service. So if you tear down the iPhone into the last component, we then arrive at the cost of each component, the manufacturers for each of those components, alternates to each of those components, compare them across different handset manufacturers. So today, a Samsung, an iPhone, versus, say, a domestically manufactured, supplied mobile phone can actually compare component to component, what is the cost. And we put out a press release. So we went out public. It's on the internet today, that the cost of the new iPhone is between $240 to $260. And we all know how much Apple is selling it for. So we all know what the margins are. That's how strong we are in the technology domain. In the automotive side, we are sitting in one of the core automotive clusters of the country, of the world. Every automotive company in Pune, in India, around the world, relies significantly on IHS Insight for their board level planning, strategy planning, model level planning, fuel type planning, and also at the engineering level to decide what safety components could be used. We actually employ more automotive analysts than any other company in the world. In the area of energy, which I'm going to talk about today, IHS is the final word, the gold standard on all spheres of energy, right from upstream oil and gas to midstream to downstream refining, marketing, as well as the new unconventional technologies. Every sphere of the energy domain IHS specializes in. In terms of maritime, we recently acquired a company called Global Trade, and with that, we've now had a maritime and trade business where we track every vessel in the world real time. So if you want to know where a ship is, including 200 different fields of information on any ship in the world, what cargoes it's carrying, who are the owners, what's the history, IHS has the information. So this just is one example of how extensive IHS is across these industries. But then what do we deliver? Great, we have this information, but we actually deliver information that goes into strategic planning. So almost every company in these sectors would use IHS for their planning. We are part of the operations, operational excellence, risk management, supply chain management in these organizations, and at the engineering level, across functional, engineering expertise. So of the 8,000 people that work in IHS, 1,200 people are actually world-class experts and researchers. These are people who've done their PhDs. These are people with 25, 30, 40 years of industry experience, who prime ministers and presidents of 100 countries would call upon for any advice, any help. Our vice chairman, for example, was invited by the Prime Minister of India to visit Delhi and receive a Lifetime Achievement Award this year, which he did in the contribution in the field of energy. So that's how strong our experts are. Then we have analysts. We have 1,400 industry analysts, including defense analysts, security analysts, analysts in automotive, analysts in the areas of chemicals, maritime, trade, economics, all of the areas which I showed you. 800 software developers. And these are the people who sit across the 140-odd global offices that we have. That's the IHS brand promise. From absolute ground-level tactics to high-level strategy, our thinking scales across almost any domain to help leading organizations seize the best opportunities in the industries. In India and South Asia, so I was the first person that IHS brought on board 3 years ago to set up the business here. And prior to that, we had acquired multiple companies. We acquired a company called I2 that had an office in Bangalore. So that's how we got the Bangalore office, which is our biggest office in the country. In 2008, we acquired a company called Global Insight, which had in turn acquired a company called CS Automotive. And that's how we got the Gurgaon office. And in 2012, 2 years ago, we acquired another company called CAPS. It's actually a product of PartMiner that we acquired. And with that came the Delhi office. But then we also work through a network of channel partners. We've got partners that we work through the country to get the reach. And then we also have country partners in Dhaka and Colombo. All in all, about 1,800 people, and the number I'm told has gone up to 2,000, actually work in South Asia for IHS. And this includes our partners, our vendors, our dedicated service providers. So enough said about IHS. I now want to focus a little bit more about some of the outputs that IHS creates so you get a feel of what do customers actually see when they talk to IHS. And I specifically chose this topic, one, because India is in the situation today that I call the quiet energy crisis, but also because India has hope. We've all delivered a clear mandate. I'm sure most of you here would have voted to elect this new government. And with the new Prime Minister, there is hope. There's a hope that the economy will revive. The Prime Minister currently is in the US. One of the key agendas for the Honorable Prime Minister Modi is to actually secure energy from the US to ensure India's energy future. And why is he wanting to secure India's energy future? Why is he saying that every household in the country should have power? It's because he realizes that only energy can drive the economy. Without energy, no matter what investments you put in which sector, the economy would start to stutter. So India is not isolated. We operate in a dynamic world. This is something that our analysts have forecasted this month, saying, led by the US, the global growth is picking up, which is a reality which some of us are experiencing. The household finances are improving. There's a private investment sentiment which is improved. There will be a reduced drag on the US expansion. But after the stall, the Eurozone is now recovering. It will resume as the policy focus shifts from austerity to growth. There's a downturn in China because of the housing markets. The growth path in emerging markets are depending a lot on structural reforms, including in India. We are all hoping that there is a reform wave that will revive the investments. The sentiments are up, but we're waiting for the structural changes for more effective capital allocation. The financial markets today are more resilient than a few years ago. But at the same time, we live in this constant world of geopolitical friction. At any point of time, there is constantly some war in some part of the world, and that is always risking economies like India. In terms of the real GDP growth, this is actually a comparison of the world with the advanced countries and the emerging markets. We clearly see that after the dip in 2008, there is a sense of steady growth in the world, in the advanced countries, as well as the developing markets. And what does that mean for Asia Pacific, which is closer home to India? If you look at this slide, you can very clearly see that excluding Japan and Sub-Saharan Africa, we will actually achieve the fastest growth in terms of real GDP. But while we are growing, the growth has been disappointing for some markets. You look at India itself, we've all experienced that in India, but it's not just the India story. This has been the story across all the emerging, the BRIC countries as they're popularly called. Brazil, Russia, China also have seen a decline over the last 2 years, but all countries are now expecting a steady revival. To add to the complexities, currencies have depreciated. So what we've got here is a comparison between the BRIC country exchange rates versus the dollar, and you can see how each of the currencies have actually depreciated. And for countries like India, where we are so heavily focused on imports for our core trade balance, it in fact complicates it further. There's a ripple effect of the currency falling. In terms of the globalization pace, it has actually slowed down. Countries are now focusing more on domestic. But at the same time, the bank rates are going to be constant. In fact, the rates, which have now been constant from mid of next year onwards, we're expecting all the bank rates to start increasing. Even in the key markets, including India, we're expecting the policy rates will actually either hold or decline. The RBI in its recent monetary policy also said the same thing, but that's the same thing that's going to happen across the BRIC nations. Prices are showing no clear direction, a lot of volatility in all industrial materials as well as the non-ferrous metals. But in the long term, what we're seeing is the oil price will rise. Currently, there's a lot of softening in the oil price, and the reason why there's a softening in oil price is because the shocks in the world, the wars in the Middle East, that were anticipated to really disrupt the oil supply haven't actually happened so much. But crude prices will gradually rise. In terms of inflation, it varies by region. But then this is how the impact comes, right? The real exchange value for the dollar would then continue to remain competitive. Coming more specifically to India, I already spoke about the hopes that the election brings, but then let's look at this outlook. And the reason I gave that background is essentially this outlook. We're expecting India's GDP to grow in the next 3 years. We're expecting inflation to drop in the next 3 years. We're expecting the exchange rate to consistently remain flat, but the current account balance that you see continues to decline until 2018. While there is still hope, the number I want you to look at on the slide is actually India here. India currently contributes 2.6% of the world GDP. By 2023, which means in the next decade itself, in our own lifetimes, very soon, we will see India contributing to 5% of the world GDP. But that's going to come at a cost, and the cost is going to be energy. India's energy demand, and this slide, I'll probably dwell a little more on this slide than the others, because this is what I want each of you to realize where we are today. If you look at the slide, we don't have a 2014 number, but it's about 800 million tons of oil equivalent is our current energy demand. Before I retire, and when all of you will be in your working age, this demand will grow to 1.6 billion metric tons of oil equivalent, which means we are going to double our energy demand. It gets further complicated. If you look at the global mix of energy in 2040, you see gas playing a very important role. Coal and oil, of course, are important, but gas is dominant. But if you look at India in 2040, you actually see gas is still very small. Coal will continue to drive our economy. Coal will be continuing to be core to our own growth and investments, and the dependence on oil is not reducing. So coal and oil, crude oil, are the two fuels that IHS predicts India will continue to depend on even up to the year 2040. And why is it so serious a situation? This is the reason. This slide should wake anybody who was trying to sleep. our domestic production of oil is stagnating. 2014 to 2040, there's a slight decline in domestic production of oil. But on the previous slide, you saw that our demand for energy is going to double by 2040. So how are we going to meet that demand? Imports. Imports would mean India will continue to remain dependent on these volatile markets in the Middle East. It will continue to remain dependent on markets in Latin America, which have a lot of political instability, like Venezuela, where we import our crude oil from. India will continue to remain dependent on the big major oil companies in the world who will have a very strong bargaining power with India. So India's imports will continue to grow at a very accelerated, highly scorching pace. There is a silver lining, but the silver lining is very bleak. The silver lining is that all the major producing companies are facing a maturity challenge. Oil today is in a very mature stage. Conventional oil and gas discoveries have actually reduced. So if you see 2013 has seen the least amount of new discoveries in the last 20 years. And 2014, the current year, is even slower. The first half of 2014 has been 30% lower than 2013. So it's becoming more and more difficult to find new oil. So it's actually the end of easy oil. There are different technologies which are now being deployed, tight oil, heavy oil, which will then be able to augment the future oil supplies. And this is a slide which may interest a lot of you because you're all looking at careers in the industry, right? What we put here is the age distribution of the population in the energy sector, the oil and gas sector. And as you can see, until about a decade ago, nobody was joining this industry. Till 15 years ago, none of the new graduates were going in. So as a consequence, this industry is today very hungry for graduates such as yourselves who are focused on developing a career in the energy sector, in the oil and gas sector. And that becomes a silver lining, not just for India, but for anybody who's interested in the energy sector around the world. The other thing to our advantage in India is that the globalization of innovation is now happening. In 2000, little over a decade ago, all of the innovation in the sector was purely concentrated in the Scandinavian countries, in Europe, and a little bit in America. But then that is now changing. You can see a lot more red dots coming in the Asia Pacific and Middle East, also up to the extent of Australia. So that means that this workforce is now becoming more global. There have been some new technologies. I don't want to talk too much about these slides, but what I want you to know is that technology is the only hope that this sector has. A country like North America, which until 10 years ago was going to heavily import gas, they had built a lot of pipelines across the country to import gas into North America and distribute it. They had built all along the North American coast a lot of LNG gasification terminals to import the LNG. LNG is nothing but gas in a liquefied form to be transported on ships because they want to import gas. The shale gas technology that revolutionized America, in 10 years' time, they've actually become gas surplus. And the US is now exporting gas to the rest of the world. In fact, one of the deals that Mr. Honorable Prime Minister Modi is going to strike, hopefully, if his visit is successful this week, is he's going to be able to secure some of the North American gas to come to India. So technology is key in this sector. The other fuel was LNG. If you look at the LNG markets, what you should look at is the fluctuating graph starting from 10% of India's gas dependency on imported gas is now up to 35%. So while you saw the steep rise in the crude dependence on imports, even the gas dependence on imports has significantly increased. In terms of the infrastructure, just a comparison of, while we all know that the US is a lot larger in terms of size, but if you look at the density of pipelines, you look at the density of the population, India still has a lot to invest and a lot to go. So we are nowhere close to anywhere where we should be. But the new government has put in place a very strong 5-year plan to be able to develop the gas infrastructure across the country. Coal, which you all saw was going to be the dominant fuel until 2040, India continues to import. And this is an irony, it's funny. I feel ashamed about this in a lot of our global forums. India has the third largest reserves of coal in the world. But still, we are today, I think, the third largest importers of coal in the world. And we will become the number one importers of coal in the world. There's been a coal scam. There was so much that happened in the Coalgate scam. Finally, this week, the Supreme Court cancelled all the coal block allocations. The whole coal sector is expecting that it will get reformed, that the coal mines will again be put out in a legitimate way out to start exploring coal. But until then, our dependence on coal continues to import. And all the power sector, which depends so heavily on thermal fuel, is actually going to be just increasing their coal consumption of imported coal rather than domestic coal. So then what's the hope for India? Renewables. This is one sector where you can clearly see that India is still comparable to the world. If you look at the investments in the new capacity generation in the renewable sector, India is actually third after China and the US. To add to this advantage, the Honorable Prime Minister has said that he will ensure that within this term, before I think 2019 is what he's promised as a part of his speech after he came to power, that every household across the country, including every rural village, will have power, even if it's solar power. So renewables, there is still some hope. And why there is hope is because costs are going to keep reducing. You look at the onshore wind turbine cost, that's going to be stagnant. The solar project costs are going to reduce. So what's next for India? And that's my last slide. So in India, there's a major reform happening currently. I'm not sure how many of you actually track the Economic Times. Isha was telling me that you have a 1-hour daily Economic Times session. So it should probably be a quiz on this, right? So how many of you have actually tracked these bullet points in the Economic Times? How many have read any of these articles in the Economic Times in the last 6 months? So I don't know which sections of the Economic Times you all have been reading, because I see no hands go up. Okay, there's only one hand up. And which one is that? Coal mining.
I've read a lot about energy crisis in India in Economic Times, and the most significant point is the gas pricing.
So that's great. That's great because you actually caught one of the most important points that India is facing today. If you read the papers today, the government has deferred the decision on gas price because the government is fearing that if they increase the gas price, they may actually lose the elections in Maharashtra and the other states that are going to come up. And this is the challenge that we all grapple with, right, day in, day out. We have elected the representatives, they are in power. So I was actually with the power ministry, with the petroleum ministry just last week in Delhi, and we were talking to them about the stark realities. And I think everybody realized that gas price has to increase. The government will increase the gas prices because there is no choice. You saw that slide that I was showing you. Our imports have gone up from 10% dependence to 35% dependence on the gas mix. The question is when. So these are some of the things which the government is now focusing on in terms of conventional oil and gas exploration. We have the next bidding rounds, NELP 10. That's again mired in controversy. There's an open acreage licensing policy, which is again mired in controversy. Gas pricing, like one of your colleagues said, is another controversy. Shale gas exploration, one more controversy. The government has allowed the domestic nationalized firms like ONGC and Oil India to explore shale gas, but the government hasn't allowed the private sector to get into the shale gas exploration. Coal bed methane, another controversy, difference between different parts of the government. The coal company, Coal India, says, I want to explore coal bed methane. The gas company says they want to explore coal bed methane. Two ministries are not able to arrive at a consensus. The pipeline network and city gas distribution, yes, there is consensus on this being expanded. You saw the numbers I've shown up there. There is an expansion plan, but again, it's about investment. Who's going to invest? Enhancing LNG import facilities and capacities. We've developed a state-of-the-art, world-class LNG import terminal in Cochin. I visited the terminal in Cochin, but that terminal in the last 8 months has imported only 3 cargoes of LNG. And the reason is because there's nowhere to sell the gas into. There is no pipeline. So the ships are coming in from around the world, bringing the gas into Cochin. It's being stored in Cochin. But who do you sell the gas to? There's a very small fertilizer plant, FACT, and there's a very small refinery, but nowhere else to take the gas. That needs to be developed. Alternate energy investments, renewables and nuclear, yes, there is hope in both of these. The government is also focusing on refining the coal sector. We're expecting, the Supreme Court, we all know, has cancelled all the coal blocks. We're now expecting them to be licensed again. And the PM's mission on renewables. So these are the various areas that the energy sector currently is facing. And what would you do if you were in IHS? You would be making money providing this information and our forecast, our insights, our analysis to companies. So companies pay anywhere from a few $1,000s to a few $1 million to IHS every month just to understand the implications. Because a $1 change in the price of gas can not just have political ramifications on the electorate, but can also have a significant impact on the overall economy. So yes, IHS is doing a lot of work in India. We are focusing on helping the government to become a lot more successful in the programs that they all are implementing right now. But it's difficult. And what does this mean to you as students who are going to pass out next year, this year? To you, what this means is that each of these sectors which today is in controversy and which the government will resolve, there will be policies that come out on all of these once the elections are over. These open up opportunities. These open up opportunities in not just the core sectors, but in the sectors that support these industries. These industries will never go out of fashion. You look at the 7 which I had shown out there on one of the slides. Defense. Right from the times of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, we know that there has been war, right? And there will continue to be as much war in the world. This sector will always need information. Chemicals, like I said, without chemicals, we won't have half our wardrobes today. Because every polyester filament, every rayon filament that we wear, every PET bottle that we use, every automotive that we use to commute, these mics, these chairs, all have chemicals and plastics in them. Finance, everything needs money. Finance will always be green. Technology, my previous speaker, my co-speaker was also talking about technology, and we all are aware that technology is growing at a very, very rapid pace. It's again a green sector. Automotive, again, so long as we have people, mobility will continue to be in fashion. The forms of mobility may change, the fuel types may change, how mobile we get with the carbon footprint may change, but automotive as a sector will always again be green. Energy, like I said, and that's the reason I focus so much on those numbers in energy. Energy is the core, the backbone for any economy. And then of course maritime and trade, so long as there is a demand and supply in a different part of the world, where resources are available in one part and there is a demand in another part of the world, maritime and trade will always be green. So what I want to suggest to each of you, what I want to advise each of you is, it's good that you're reading the Economic Times, but try and focus on which sectors you all want to get into. Because companies today are looking for specialization. Companies today are looking for expertise in core areas. IHS, for example, has stopped recruiting people who are generalists. IHS only recruits people who are specialists. Now, it's a conscious choice that we've made to have few people, maybe at a higher cost, but have few people who are ready for doing the job from day one. But that's again something that you need to be, considerate about. You need to be able to honing your skills, make sure that you are well read, well up to date on whatever sectors you want to get into. The other thing I want to talk about is use this opportunity in your protected environment to maximize your learning. Once you step out in the corporate world, into the ruthless corporate world as I call it, the chances to learn, the opportunities to learn will suddenly shrink. You know, all that I showed you today, for example, we work with the chairman's office of all the top oil companies in India. We actually work with all the top strategists in India's military, in the planning cells, in the security agencies. But the reason why they really look up to our information, why they love to meet us, is purely because we're able to give them all of this information that we learn about and put it in a concise capsule for them to digest. So learning is key. And the corporate world, the first few years, you will have very little time to learn. So learn as much as you can about those sectors, about those industries, read up all you can. Once you step out, it is very different. No matter how much your directors and your professors may prepare you for it, it is a very, very different world. How many here have prior work experience before you came in? So a lot of your colleagues already know, right, how this world actually moves and behaves. So my suggestion, I mean, when I joined IHS, this is the slide I looked at, and I said, okay, am I going into a company which could go bust, or am I going into a company which would have solutions for the future? And our CEO, Scott Key, actually says, we are creating a company that never existed before. And it's true. I was just having a very casual chat with Sir, while sitting with him, with your president. And he just looked at some of our material that we put out and he was mighty impressed. And I don't think he did it just to impress me. I think he was genuinely very impressed with what we had to offer, because even in his days in the military, like I said, he used to rely a lot on the IHS information. Right? So you need to be able to create an advantage. So whichever company you work for, wherever you're going, make sure that the company is creating a differential advantage, because that company will grow. You can work for any company in the world, it's your choice, but always, try and work for a company where there is something unique, there's something that they're doing different, and that aligns with your own passion. My first job was a disillusionment. I got my campus placement. I don't want to name the company, it's been spoken in the introduction, but I was disillusioned by media. I had this fascination for the media world, and I said I want to work for a media company. 6 months in the job, I knew it was not for me. So my second job, I stayed there for almost a decade. And then again, I switched jobs only because I knew that this company wants to create what I have already created for my existing company, and I reached a stagnation point. So try and align your passion with a differential that you're creating, with a company that's going to create a differential, so that you are able to then make sure that if the company grows, you grow, and you're happy with that growth. So enough said. What I want to do is use maybe the next 10 minutes that we have to answer any questions that you may have, either about IHS, about any of the information I've shared with you, that we would share with the end customer, or any other questions on careers that you would want to shoot.